All right. So for our particular main stage and black box theater, these are the measurements that you need. And if you're building any uh, theater from the measurements that you're sent, you really only need a couple of measurements. For a black box, it's pretty simple. It's length times width, and you need the height of the room. Now, for a main stage theater, you usually have the shape of the box that includes the wings, and then the shape of the apron and the opening of the proscenium. So that's a bit more. But essentially, the back of the box, in this case, is 66 and a half by 33. And then it adds on a proscenium that's 38 feet wide by 13 feet deep. And the proscenium opening is inside of that. It's usually assumable that the proscenium opening is on the center of the front wall of the theater, although that isn't always the case. But that proscenium is 52 feet wide and 20 feet high. So that's this measurement right here. So these are all the things we're going to use to make the main stage. The main stage is more complicated, so we're going to make that together. But theoretically, if you were making this black box, you would take a scale ruler and you would go ahead and make all of the lines, and you could measure 58 inches and you would measure 49 inches and you could measure all those things. But because you're going to need to add a little bit of wiggle room here and there, usually I go ahead and do a lot of that math first, and then I don't have to worry about it quite as much. So what I mean by that is 58 feet in 58 actual feet. If I were to do that in half-inch scale, that would be 25 plus 4. So that's 29. 29 halves of an inch to make that. So for example, if I have 2 feet, that's 1 real inch. So if I take 58, I don't have 58 inches, I have 29 inches. So if I were to make this in half-inch scale, I would be doing 29 real inches. So what I'll do is I'll make that, I'll divide it in half, and then I'll divide it in half again. And so that's going to be 14.5, right? Yes. So that's going to be 14.5 real inches to make 58 feet in quarter-inch scale. So if I take that and I've got 14 and a half real inches, this is quarter-inch thick foam core. So I'm going to go ahead and add 2 more inches on that. And then this is something I'm going to cut out in 15 real inches. Now, of course, I could take my scale ruler and actually measure out 58 feet in scale and then add 2/4 of an inch on either side. That's perfectly acceptable. I just tend to do it this way. So this one right here, 49 feet deep. So I'm going to divide in half, which is 24 and a half. And then I'm going to divide that in half again. So 12 and a quarter. And then once again, I need to add the thickness of each piece on each side. So that's 12 and 3/4 of an inch in real inches. So this distance here is going to be 12 3/4 of an inch in real inches. Each of these pieces on each side, I'm going to then figure out how big they're going to be. And this is 18 feet 2 inches. I'm going to ignore the 2 inches because when you're in quarter-inch scale, that's just not big enough to matter all that much in this case. And making it slightly 2 inches short is going to be fine. So half of 18 is 9. Half of 9 is 4.5 real inches, right? So when I make this model box, I need to cut out my bottom piece right? Which is going to be 15 inches by 12 3/4 of an inch. I'm going to need to cut out alongside here, which will be 15 inches by 4.5 real inches. And I need 2 of those. And then the ones over here, they would be 12 3/4 inches, but then we're going to have that corner overlap again. So I need to take 1/2 inch off of that. So it's going to be 12 1/4 inches by 4.5 inches times 2. So now I've got my cut list. That's relatively easy. That's how to make a black box. Cut those out, glue them together as we talked about in the earlier part, and you're easy peasy lemon squeezy. So I'm going to go ahead and do the math for this one as well. And I'm going to do that real quick. That's better. 66.5 divided by 2 divided by 2. Okay. So these are all our measurements before we account for space. So for the 16.6 real inches, we need to add on to that the thickness on each side. So that's going to round up to 17 inches real size by, and this is where we need to make a little bit of adjustment as well. We've got 33. We need to add the 13 for that. Our base size needs to be this big. So actually, instead of using 33, I should use 46 divided by 4, and that's going to be by 11.5. This time I don't need to account for both this thickness and this thickness. I only need to account for it on one side because I'm only going to have this thickness here. I'm not going to have thickness on the end. So my base piece that I'm going to cut out is actually going to be 17 real inches by 11.75 real inches. Now I need a back piece. That back piece, so we have the floor, we have the back, we have the front, the support, and the little wings. So this base piece here is going to be 1 at 17 inches by 11.75 inches. Then I'm going to need to cut my back. So that's going to be 1 at that full 17 inches wide. And now I need to go the height. So the height is going to be a little different. 20 feet high is 5 inches, but that 5 inches is to the top of the opening. That's right here. I need a little bit more room up here to make this visually look correct. So instead of going with 20 inches, which is 5 inches high, I should go with something a little bit beefier. Now, I could pick something arbitrary, 1.5 inches, 2 inches. That's absolutely acceptable. But one of the things I could do is figure out what this is right here and try and be similar so that it has an even frame all the way around. So how do I find that? 66. Whoa. Calculator, 66.5 minus 52. That's 14.5 divided by 2. Nope. Equals divided by 2 equals divided by 4. So this is almost 2 inches here. It's 1.8 inches. So we're going to go ahead and do 2 inches at the top. So I'm going to take this 20 feet or 5 inches, and I'm going to add 2 real inches. So I'm going to make that 1 at 17 uh, inches by 7 inches. I'm going to make that 2, one for the front, one for the back. We'll cut the proscenium out of it. One with a proscenium cut. So how big does that proscenium cut need to be? The proscenium cut is going to be 52 divided by 4, which is 13 inches by that 5 inches again. Okay. So I can totally go from there on what these are right here, but those little pieces, it doesn't matter how wide they are, but they need to be at least that 33 feet. So that 33 feet is going to be 11.75 inches, right? No, that was with my added width. That's going to be that 8.25. And then this distance right here, how much we set that back is 13 in scale, which is going to be 3.25. So that'll come in later. So these are the measurements we need to make our box together. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Now, I want to point out that I like to do this math so that I can get those real inches and figure that out. If that is bending your brain, you can absolutely measure all of those things in scale. Just make sure you're using the correct scale at the correct time and all that jazz. So here is my cutting mat and my page. And I'm going to go ahead and start cutting out the pieces that I need for my main stage. I did miss one. These little wing guys. We need 2 of them. And I just happen to know that they're 6 feet in scale. So that's going to be 1.5 inches by the height of the proscenium, which is going to be 5 inches. Yeah. Okay. Now I need some sort of marking implement so that I can actually make marks on my surface. And I also have a hot glue gun hot so that I can put my things together. I have a knife that thankfully was closed. And I have 2 corkback rulers in which to do my measuring. So I have 1 piece of foam core and I should be able to probably get an entire theater out of this. So let me see, 17 inches. And I'm going to make a mark. And so I'm going to come over here and I am going to measure 17 inches, 17 real inches and make a mark. And now I'm going to cut out 17 real inches, 11.75, and then 2 at 7 if I can. So I'm going to measure up this side, 11.25. And then I'm going to add 7 to that. And I'm not going to get all of that onto this one piece. So I need a total of 14 inches left. And I have just under that. Here, I'm going to go with this. So I need a total that's lined up to the end there. And I need a total of 14 inches left in order to make both those top pieces. But instead I have 13 inches. And I don't know if you remember, but I chose that 2 inches, not arbitrarily, but I did choose that 2 inches. So I'm going to reduce that. I'm just going to make both my front and back piece instead of making this 17 by 7, I'm going to make them both 17 by 6. It's going to be a little smaller than ideal, but then I can get it out of 1 piece of paper or 1 piece of foam core, and I like that. So that's what I'm going to do. Uh, 17 by 6.5. I can go up to 6.5 because I have 13 inches left. Okay. So whenever possible, I am going to make sure to be cutting from 2 separate sides. from two separate points that I get two measurements from. So I'm marking at 17 here. And I'm marking at 17 here. So that I can come in and make that cut. It's going to be much easier for you to see these cuts when I'm not cutting so big. But when you're cutting off your foam core for the first time, that's a little bit unavoidable. So once again, I'm going to do my good cutting techniques using a cork back ruler, a nice sharp blade, and making it line up to both marks at the same time, pressing firmly in a wide stance, cutting through the paper on top, and then the foam core till it releases. So even that is just a little bit more manageable. Now I made marks on one side, but I'm going to make marks on the other side so that I'm able to connect those reliably. 6.5 inches. And the other side was 11 3/4. So now I'm going to line that up, line it up to the pencil mark here, line it up to the pencil mark here, and do a gut check. And that gut check says, no, thank you. That did not look correct. 11.75. 11 1/4. So I mismarked that. And that also means that I have to change my other measurement because it's a lie. So it does need to be 6 inches. 6 inches even. 6 inches even, I say. Just make it easy. Do this again. 11 3/4. 6 inches even. And 6 inches even. Okay. Oh my goodness. For realsies. Now I'm going to line those two marks up. And now that looks straight. Looks correct. It's a good thing to get used to is making sure that you're getting a little bit of a gut check when you put your line up, your ruler up there. If the ruler does not look straight, it's probably not straight. And you should double check your measurements. So that is my floor to my main stage. Looking all nice and pretty. And now we have my back. Once again, you want to cut through the paper, cut through the foam core, and cut through the paper on the other side, keeping that nice and straight. And I want the front and the back to be the same measurement. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I cut that little extra bit off of this because I rounded it to 6, or I made it 6 exactly. I didn't want to go over and deal with trying to cut that in half. Okay, so now we have a back and we have a front. So for my front, I'm going to lay out what is in what the proscenium that I need to cut out. So that means that I need to find the exact center of this. It's 17, so that's going to be 8.5. Yay, easy peasy. After I go to 8.5, the total width of my piece is going to be 13 inches. So I'm going to go to 13. Half of 13 is 6.5. And I'm going to mark at 13 and I'm going to mark at 0. Doing pretty well, right? Great. So now I've got my mark at each side where I want to go. And I also need to make a mark up 5 inches. Now you want to be very careful that you're making this mark as square as possible. So one of the things you can do is make sure that your bottom is 2 1/16. And here you can see that that is where it is if it were straight. So This is not at this point, and that means that my line is not straight. So if I don't use 2 points to draw a line, I don't get a straight line. I know that that seems really redundant for me to keep saying, but it is true. And every time you have an error, you can compound that error and make things worse and worse as you go until you have something that's very inaccurate. So you want to be careful to keep your measurements as accurate as you possibly can. So over here, I'm going to do 5 inches up on the outside edge and 5 inches up on the outside edge, because those are as straight and square as I can possibly make them. And then connect my interior pieces. And so now I'm going to use this as my back side of the proscenium, and I'm going to cut this out. This seems because it is wide, because our theater is weird. Okay. So in order to cut these out, I'm going to come over here. I'm going to push this nice and tight into the corner and get that fully cut out. And do the same over here. Nice and tight into the corner. And then once again, nice and tight into the corner and through to the middle. I'm going to do that on both sides. And because I did all my marking on this side, the other side will be nice and clean when I pull it out. Nope, not if I cut off in the middle of nowhere. All right. So be careful while you're cutting. If you make a mistake, it'll show. But now you've got all of that. I don't recommend cutting left-handed. You can also use this interior for those little wings. So those little wings I was talking about need to be the height of the opening, which this is, and it needs to be 1.5 inches. 1.5 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and do both of those. 1.5 inches, 1.5 inches. So I'm going to cut both of these off. To get my pieces. Okay. Next, I'm going to make some triangles to help hold our walls up. So I'm actually just going to use my grid and I'm going to cut 2 inches off. 2 inches off because these don't need to be super exact. I don't need to measure as precisely. And now I'm going to cut a diagonal. I'm going to make sure to start not in the corner and end not in the corner. It doesn't matter what exact angle this is at, but that's my goal, is just to eyeball it and end not in the corner, not in the corner. And that'll give me 2 nice corner pieces to use to shore up and support my back and front wall. Last, but certainly not least, are those little 13-inch pieces. And it doesn't, they're not 13, they're 8.5. Did that last time too. The 8.5-inch pieces. So I need 2 at 8.5 inches. So I'm going to make a mark at 8.5 and a mark at 8.5. And I'm going to go ahead and cut that here. Now you may be thinking to yourself, Jennifer, you only have 1. That is correct. I'm going to split it in half. And once again, these are support pieces and not exactly measured pieces. So I'm going to go ahead and use that as 2 pieces. So now I have all my pieces to put this together at the ready. So I'm going to hot glue on these pieces. Get these off to the side. So I've got my back piece, and I'm going to take some hot glue, and I'm going to run that along the bottom of my piece as neatly as I can without using too much glue. And I want it to look pretty from the inside and not, I don't care as much about the outside. So I'm going to line it up and then roll it up into place like this so that the squeeze out is more focused on the back side than the front side. As you notice, it's going to be a little bit floppy to start. Part of that is because it doesn't have any support. So I'm going to grab one of the triangles and I'm going to immediately give this wall support. On the edge, I'm going to glue it to the base and the back along the 90-degree edge, and that will keep my wall 90 degrees. And I'm going to put one on both sides of our back wall. Excellent. Next, that is getting dry. I held it for a couple seconds and it's good to go. So the next one, this measurement up here needs to be 3.5 inches. And that was that 3.5 inches in real measurements that we did for the depth of the 13-foot depth in scale of the apron. So this is where our proscenium wall is going to sit. So this is where our proscenium wall is going to sit right here. So I'm going to go ahead and glue that in place. So it's just a little bit of glue on the bottom. And I can place that right where it goes. And now I'm going to do those triangles again. One on the back of the right side. One on the back of the left side. You want to do those triangles sooner rather than later. You don't want this to dry at not a square angle before you have a chance to get that in place. I did knock over one of my little long pieces. And now this long piece should fit from back to front. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to do a rabbet joint. So I'm going to cut only through the foam and then cut through make that a shallower piece. And that just will be a slightly more attractive look at the top. And it will keep all of those pieces together. This is not required. You can just cut it from the, you can just adhere them together from the top or inset them to account for the thickness of the other piece. But I kind of like to do the rabbet joint. I think it's more attractive looking. All right, so here's our star. Put a little glue, and now I can sink this in here and sink that in there, and it just stays in place a little bit easier. If I'm trying to do any other type of joint, a butt joint, or even a joint where I stick it on top, it becomes a little harder to hold it in place in this method because I have that little L shape. It just slots in and pushes itself against the front and the back. So it just holds in place across the front and the back. Now we've got these two little doors, and you can absolutely go ahead and just glue those on if you would like in one position or another. And that's perfectly viable. However, they are placed with their pivot point as far from the end of the proscenium as you can get. So this is their pivot point here. So it's in 6 inches in from the edge here, and it's on a pivot that goes through the proscenium opening like so. So I'm going to go ahead and glue them down in a configuration. But one of the things you might want to pay attention to is that it could be a different configuration, because it's up to you to choose where you want it to go. So you can make it the farthest open, the farthest shut, any way you would like it. Another thing you could do is you could take a pin and push that pin up through the bottom of your foam core into these pieces, and then they will rotate. So if you're just going to go, 1 second. Okay, so if you want to maintain the ability to move that pin around, you can use, or to move these around, you can use a pin, preferably a flathead pin. And what you would do is figure out exactly where you would want to put that thing, and then lift up the edge and push your pin through. And this allows you to get exactly where in your model box that pin should be. So then you're going to take it, put it in the bottom of your model box and stick it up so that it's sticking out of the bottom of your model box, and then slide the corner of your piece onto it. And now you have a rotating thing, and you can rotate that to your heart's content. So if you don't want to glue it and keep it down in a specific place, then go ahead and grab yourself a flathead pin, push it through the bottom, and finish your model that way. It's entirely up to you. Now, as you saw, the black box was a simpler version of this. And for that, you're just using the corners of each side to keep it together like these little triangles. And that is also why it's a bit simpler. But this involves just one piece of mat board, or sorry, one piece of foam core from the box. And that's all you need to complete this 1/4 inch scale model of the main stage. All right, so that is about it. All you have left to do is get a piece of foam core and make your model box. Thank you all.